Welcome to Conversations from the Continent with the Movement for Economic and Social Development in Africa, MESTA. This is a platform where we engage with Africa's most inspiring thought leaders, professionals, and doers that are driving transformation on the continent. On this podcast, we tell African stories, discuss solutions for African challenges, and shape positive African narratives to mentor and inspire our listeners. On this season, we will cover a wide range of topics across different fields, including entrepreneurship, healthcare, activism, nonprofit work, entertainment, climate change, and politics. My name is Meamande Wamukwamba, and I am your host. Our guest on today's episode is Dr. Howard Ayo, the Executive Director and founder of Norms Africa Development based in Kampala, Uganda. Dr. Ayo holds a doctorate in business and human rights and has over 17 years of experience conducting interdisciplinary research on the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in both Africa and Europe. This is amongst many other things. Dr. Howard, welcome to Conversations from the Continent.
Thank you for having me.
We have an icebreaker on the show where we learn more about African names. So, do you know what Ayo means? Does it have any significant meaning in your tribe? Could you share more about that?
What a way to start, but again, Amanda, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to have this chat. So the name Ayo cuts across Uganda, then West Africa, majorly Nigeria, and some parts of the DRC, that's the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Right.
The meaning, literally, my mom told me it means somebody who is born lucky. Probably I want to ask her more. That's all she told me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. We have this thing, like, it's so interesting to learn about African names and their significance. Is there a synergy between tribes in Uganda and like West Africa, like you said? Do you speak the same language, or is it just the name that's common across the cultures?
So, I come from the Amatics, the Amitic group, that is the Nile Amites. We follow more on the River Nile path.
Right.
So you'll find we are spread across Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and again, I told you part of West Africa. That's our migratory route before we finally settled in Uganda. We are agro-pastoralists in Nigeria. That means we do agriculture, and also we keep animals. So we are quite similar in language with the Luo. The Luos, who are the Nilotics as well. So we are spread out in terms of language and also geographic spread in Africa. Some other theorists say we have origins, part of it linked to the Middle East, that is Israel. I am not so sure about that, but again, if you land on text which are showing certain things like that, then just know narratives moves, but that's how we are. We are quite spread across the Africa as a continent.
Very, very interesting. You learn something, I think, about the different cultures, I think, with this segment of the show, which is I think there's even parts of, because I'm Lozi, and they say the Lozis are a mix of Kololos from South Africa and Luyanas that are also from up north. So there could actually be a nexus there somehow. You never know. I think that's something that's worth pursuing. Anyways, let's get into it. Tell us a bit more about yourself, your journey, and what led you to start Norms Africa Development. Perhaps you could even share a bit about what you do at Norms Africa.
So, of course, I'm born in Uganda, in a city called Lira City, which is up north of the country. That is where my childhood journey uh, uh, began, and along the way, helping the family with farming and looking after animals, but also being educated. I come from a very highly educated family. My dad, um, um, deceased now, was a doctor and so much grounded in academia. And my mom did engineering. So I was raised where they were mixing both farming and practice, majorly in the academia. So I moved quite along until 28, 29, when I started working with the International Rescue Committee. I was a program manager managing a program, an integrated program of education, livelihoods, and infrastructure. Quite substantial amount of money, over €500,000. Then I joined the United Nations in 2009, where I was working as a human rights officer, focusing squarely on economic, social, and cultural rights in the development sphere, broadly, or as I may put it, on the right to development. And up until about 2006 to 2007, where I got a prestigious scholarship to go and do a doctorate in business and human rights at Ulster University in the United Kingdom. So that's been quite of my journey, and along the way, I've also been doing, when I was doing research on my doctorate, maybe for listeners, because I will be navigating between research and doctorate. I was doing consultancy still for the United Nations, and also for national human rights institutions, civil society organizations, broadly in the area of business and human rights, and also development. So that's been quite a journey for me, and I've loved it because it's in the area of what I've grown, over time to love doing. Yeah.
Right. And that led to you kind of starting Norms Africa Development. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about your programmatic objectives and what you're trying to achieve with Norms Africa.
Yeah. When I finished my doctoral studies in 2002, my then supervisors asked me, what are your future plans? And I told them I don't know. I really don't know. And they said, would you be planning of doing something back home? I said the future is open, and I will take it with grace. Whatever comes across my way in the area of what I've been doing for the last 6 years,
Right.
At the university, where I can have significant impact, I'll be happy to do it. So I came back home for a holiday, and I said, okay, let me conceptualize something in the area of business and human rights, where I can have roots in Africa in terms of the impact of, trying to share a little bit on what I have researched and create positive impact across the board. So I decided to conceptualize Norms Africa development, and Norms originates from the international law or international norms, basically, where you are trying to bring it down into the continent and see it integrated into national legislation, policies, programs, and operations of civil society and business enterprises. So I had to sit down, look broadly and say, okay, let me conceptualize and bring up Norms Africa Development, a not-for-profit organization that will be in position to work across 3-4 broad themes. The first one is business and human rights, which is the core mandate of the organization. The second one is gender justice, which has a nexus, a direct link with business and human rights. Then the other third component is business and human rights within the broader framework of climate change. And the last one is sustainable development. So on the last bit of it, and that's sustainable development, I've been implementing it with the UN ever since it was launched around 2015. And so the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which was endorsed in 2011. So I've been working with these frameworks and developed extensive capabilities in them, created a lot of impacts working in these areas in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, part of Switzerland, UK, and now we are trying to have the same discussion in Zambia, hoping that, in the near few months, we should be having broader discussions around the thematic area. So that's how Norms Africa was conceptualized. It's still a baby, I would say, barely 2 years old. We hope in the next 5 or so years we should have a broader turnaround in terms of our operational scope in Africa and beyond. So in a nutshell, that's the organization, Norms Africa Development.
Right. There's something interesting you said that I found very relatable when I considered, I think, my own journey when conceptualizing MESDA for a long time. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially in that late 20s to early 30s phase where you really kind of don't know what you want to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
I also had that space, and I somehow sometimes still feel like I'm in that space where I'm just like, I don't really know what direction I want. I don't know what I want to do. Do I want to stay practicing? Do I want to start my own thing? Do I want to get a good job? And I struggled with that for some time, and I feel like maybe just to share this, something that I found I had to really just move on instinct, right? So then figure out what don't I like to do and what do I like to do. And then I think that's what I'm also getting from your story, kind of just following the direction of the things that you enjoy doing and finding your space or finding something to do there. I think that's kind of how I similarly ended up leaving practice and joining civil society and starting MESDA. So that's something that I thought I should just say because I found it very, very relatable. And you spoke about what you're doing in Zambia, and we also do business and human rights. And something that we found is that people don't really understand what the concept of business and human rights is to begin with, especially businesses. And I'll say this also, even the legal fraternity, I'll speak maybe because I also have a background in practice. A lot of lawyers in Zambia, particularly, I think it's changing now. And I bring in lawyers because they are business people, right? For all intents and purposes. They don't really appreciate the role, or many did not anyways, appreciate the role of human rights in the business space, in the corporate space. What exactly is your definition of business and human rights? Let's start there. What is this business and human rights concept to begin with?
Yeah, it's not true per se that people or legal scholars may not understand what business and human rights is. The only challenge we have is that it is not integrated into our curriculum, and this is a rather very new concept that came in 2011.
Right.
In most schools, for example, the School of Law, you'll find they will teach you about corporate law, right, or human rights law,
Yes.
just as a module, no, but not as a distinct discipline.
Right.
But also, you go to the School of Management, they will teach you about business ethics.
Right.
They'll teach you about due diligence. So you'll find then fragments, right? They are not mainstream discipline, and this is not unique to Zambia. This is a global issue.
Right.
In that business and human rights is an evolving concept. You'll find there are less than 5 universities right now in the world that are offering it this course as a discipline at a master's level. It has not been devolved to yet to a degree,
right.
Undergrad level. It's majorly postgrad, and these universities, none of them are in Africa. They are all in Europe and in America. So it tells you that this is a very young concept. But let me go to your question on what exactly is business and human rights. Now, I'll give you just a very brief and quick history of business and human rights. Even before we were born, way back in the 17th century, there existed businesses, right? And there existed people, right?
Right.
But the codification of human rights per se was not yet done in a very open way. And this relationship existed in that because businesses are operating in a space where there are people, there are bound to be a relationship. And this relationship can either be negative or positive. But the aim, if you see how businesses are structured, they're profit driven, right? And also, if you see the environment in which they operate, where human beings are, there is a mutual relationship in terms of either employment or in terms of services or products that they are providing to the society,
right,
or the communities in which they are working. So there is that relationship, mutual relationship or complementary relationship, where each of them derives certain benefits from the relationship. Now, this relationship over time became quite toxic in a way that businesses became very exploitative in order for them to maximize profits at the expense of, human beings, or at the expense of the society that they're operational in. You have heard of situations where they are saying businesses are exploiting the natural resources we have, either in minerals, either in agriculture, either in forestry or in the water bodies. They're exploiting those resources and they're not investing back in the same community the way they're supposed to invest, right? There is no mutual gain in the relationship. And in the School of History, if I may take you there, you have heard of a situation where there were issues of slave trade or slavery,
right?
Okay, where people were being conscripted into hard labor. People were being conscripted into slavery to go and provide and let me talk about the African context. They are talking, I mean, they are being taken, shipped into Europe to provide cheap labor because Europe was undergoing industrialization, right?
Yes.
They're being shipped into the sea, the Indian Ocean, where there were plantations of sugarcane and cotton, producing raw materials for the industrializing country. So that relationship was not mutual, right?
No.
It was one-sided. So around 45, 1948 or thereabout, the United Nations came up with a universal declaration on human rights, or a declaration where they're saying that, human beings have rights which are inherent in them, and we need to make sure that we protect these rights. If we do not protect these rights, it is negatively impacting on what we call human dignity,
Right.
where you do not have a life that is worth living in such a relationship. So the discussion around human rights came up, and there's what we called the Bill of Rights at the international level. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is one of them. Then we have the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. That broadly gives you the scope of economic rights, social rights, cultural rights, and how they should be protected internationally. Then we had the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which is largely talking about civil rights, political rights, Thereafter, there were other conventions and international treaties that came about, including those which are stopping slavery, those which are, going against torture, those which are talking about women's rights, children's rights, the rights of persons with disabilities. So that era between 1950 and up to around 2005, quite a number of international treaties and conventions came up to try to harmonize the relationship between human rights and how it is supposed to be protected, promoted, and fulfilled. But if you look at this era, these international law frameworks did not talk about the relationship between businesses and human rights, right? They were
Right.
talking about what governments are supposed to do to protect human rights, what governments are supposed to do to promote the right to development, what governments are supposed to do to protect women's rights, children's rights, labor rights, environmental rights, okay? And now we are talking about climate change, which is now being codified as a right. So very little was being talked about until around 2008, when the UN Human Rights Council adopted a report of the UN Secretary General, UN Special Rapporteur on the rights to, Special Rapporteur who was looking at transnational businesses and how they intersect with human rights. Now, in 2008, when this report was adopted, this report was purely looking at the relationship between businesses and human rights. And they found that, look here, despite all, the past 50 years or thereabout, we have been only talking about the state duties to protect human rights. We have been talking about the rights to development. The Vienna Declaration was talking about purely, how governments should come about different mechanisms to protect rights. But we are not talking about the relationship that businesses are having with human rights. Now, in this report, Professor Rugi, and may his soul rest in peace, he died not so long ago, he came up with three thematic areas where businesses intersect with states and also people and the environment and the planet. Now, the three themes, the first one basically is said, because businesses are operational in a regulated space where governments exist, and also in areas where governance or governments are very, very, very weak, there is a duty that is implored on governments at the international level for them to protect human rights, and that is the primary duty of of governments, okay,
Right.
under the international law, and that is not a contested debate. But also, businesses, because they operate in such, I mean, in these spaces, businesses have a responsibility to human rights, okay,
Yes.
in a way that they need to be operating in a regulated space. Because if you do not regulate them, it has proven that businesses tend to impact on human rights negatively, in addition to, of course, their positive contribution. So this report did not negate the fact that businesses contribute to development, or businesses contribute towards promoting, human dignity or human development. Okay, it did not refuse that fact, but it is said that because businesses are operating in such spaces, their operations have been very significant in a negative way in developing countries, including Africa, and Asian states and Europe. And this relationship needs to be regulated. So the thematic area is saying businesses needs to operate responsibly.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the third component of this report is that businesses and governments need to provide access to remedy in the event that their operations violates human rights or abuses human rights, right? Now, within this space, we have people, we have the environment, we have, other stakeholders, civil society, we have religious institutions, we have cultural institutions that are operating in the same space. And they're saying the operations of business enterprises should do no harm on these institutions and also stakeholders, but rather it should promote the realization of the objectives for which they are established. Okay.
Right.
I hope it is not going more technical.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So,
Helpful.
right.
Yeah.
So when this report was established, they told the UN Special Rapporteur on transnational companies and human rights to come up with guiding principles. How do we then operationalize this framework? So in 2011, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights was adopted to operationalize this report. Now, the UN Guiding Principles, they came up with 31 principles divided across 3 areas. The state duty to protect human rights, and that is the role of government to protect human rights. What exactly are they supposed to do to ensure that business operations business operations respect human rights? And what does it mean for the state duty to protect human rights, which is basically coming under the international law? Right. And the other element is that there are certain guiding principles that are supposed to help businesses to operate responsibly. Okay. Now, the third part of this is basically access to remedy. So, the 31 principles is basically supposed to guide businesses, civil society, business enterprise, state actors, and other entities that are operational in this space. When it comes to this relationship between business and to make sure that businesses operate responsibly, because when you operate responsibly, governments are in position to derive benefits from this relationship in terms of taxes, in terms of corporate social responsibilities, in terms of innovation, in terms of economic growth and human capital development. And businesses are in position to derive to generate more profits. Okay. So the relationship between business and human rights, as you have said, what exactly is it? It's basically looking at where we have come from and where we want to go as future generation when it comes to this relationship, where there is a mutual benefit in that operations of business enterprises promote rather than diminish the realization of human rights. But it also helps the state to put in place framework that regulates the relationship between human rights, between business enterprises and human rights. But it also helps other stakeholders to claim their rights, to defend their dignity when it comes to, their relationship with business enterprises.
Right.
So that is the relationship we are trying to talk about, and that is the broader framework of business and human rights. I hope it brings a bit of some,
Totally.
it brings the story home.
Something
Right.
that you said very interesting that I actually didn't consider when thinking about the history of BHR was actually how it even ties to the colonial or slavery aspect of African history. I didn't actually think
Correct.
about it from from that angle, despite the fact that that's a very significant part of our history. It's not our entire history, but it's a significant part of it. I didn't think about it like that. And there's a few things that you've said that I found interesting. Taking it all the way back even to how you had talked about basically how the concepts and ideas around business and human rights do exist, and they are part of our syllabus. We did corporate law. We even when I was in management school, we did do ethics and we did do all these things. But like you said, the fact that they are not consolidated, it makes it difficult for professionals to kind of understand how to place this concept in their work. Even when they're already doing it, they just don't know that they're doing it, right? And
Yeah.
something also that I found interesting that you said, which is so true about civil society generally, is that we have a lot of government. Our advocacy is primarily government facing. So we're always telling the government to do A, B, C, D. Or if there's an issue, it's always, and we kind of neglect business facing advocacy. And I think maybe that's something that we need to kind of adjust in our advocacy models to kind of have a more holistic approach, because there's a lot of money in the private sector that could be channeled towards certain causes, but there's this gap between, there's like a discord between our operations as civil society, government, and businesses, and I think that discord harms the communities most. And this kind of leads to my next question. Even after you have really brilliantly shared the background of business and human rights and what it is, my next question is kind of like more of a practical question. What practical steps can we take to ensure that businesses respect human rights, especially in the context of investment in Africa as it is right now, and how, again, speaking to this discord between the three sections of society. In my view, I feel like society is founded on 4 pillars, right? Government, business, civil society, and the media. And if these pillars are not kind of, coordinated or synchronized, then there's a discord, right? And then on the top of those pillars is the community. And now if we consider the businesses part, what practical steps can we take? Also, maybe just to add quickly, to maybe add a bit more context, we do receive reports about businesses having a closer relationship with governments, and they make certain agreements, especially for these large investments, without really involving the public. Yet their operations directly affect the public. So, in this backdrop, in this climate, what can we do and how can we do it to now begin to ensure that businesses can have a more human rights friendly approach to their operations. I hope my question makes sense because I've said a lot of things, but I hope you get the gist of what I'm trying to ask.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, let's face it this way. The concept of business and human rights is rather new, and we need to invest significantly in building our capacities around business and human rights as a starting point, meaning that we have to invest in awareness raising across board, meaning that we need to have a targeted investment for the government to appreciate what business and human rights is. We have to invest in businesses to appreciate what business and human rights is. We have to invest in the capacities of civil society organizations. And most importantly, we have to invest in the capacities of rights holders. And in rights holders here, I'm meaning children, women, men, elderly persons, minorities groups. Because, operations of businesses affects the entire scope of human rights, be it civil, economic, political, social, cultural. It has a 360 degree impact on human rights. And irrespective of the size or the scope of their operation, and whether it is multinational in nature, whether it is businesses operating in the informal sector, and whether they are nationally registered businesses, all of them have an impact on human rights. And I say both negative and positive. So we have to invest in capacity. And if you leave any of these stakeholders out, the impact will be negatively significant in that it will wipe off the benefits that would, or the capacity built on the one side. For example, you might target to invest significantly in building the capacity of the state in business and human rights and business enterprises. What if you leave out civil society and rights holders? And if we are saying the right to attain development, now it has to be grounded in human rights, right? Now, because what is development for anyway? It's supposed to uplift human dignity, okay? Now, if human dignity is grounded in rights, that means the process and operations of business enterprises and also programming by the state has to be grounded in human rights. And that is the kind of capacity we're saying we need to invest in. Now, on the practical side of it, we need to ensure that awareness is invested in significantly across board. We have to develop tools and provide resources to stakeholders in the area of business and human rights. We have to invest in human capabilities, meaning that we need to develop the young talents. We need to focus on the youth when it comes to business and human rights, developing their capabilities so that they're in position to help claims the spaces for business and human rights and complement where there are gaps for government and business operations. We need to, in addition to that, broaden our network beyond Zambia when it comes to business, because that relationship helps in terms to learn what is being done in other jurisdictions. And lastly, we need to have spaces and places for dialogue created in Zambia and beyond for business and human rights. If this is not provided, then the speed at which we are going to realize the benefits that comes with this relationship will be rather slow, and it will take a lot of time to achieve this. Governments need to make sure that at a structural level we have policies and laws and regulations and institutions establish for business and human rights, because businesses can no longer, it's no longer acceptable for them to be self-regulated or to work in an environment that is not regulated when it comes to business and human rights. So the laws have to cohere or to align with the international instrument with which governments are parties to. Zambia is a party member to the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. What does that mean? It means they have to domesticate to the extent possible all the rights that are therein. They are also a signatory to the civil and political rights. What does that mean? Establish frameworks that promotes the realization of business and human rights, and rather than create an environment that stifles dissent when it comes to the discussion around business and human rights. They have to make sure that institutions like the Zambia Human Rights Commission, Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Mines, and if you go at the regional level, the districts, they have institutions that promote good governance for business and human rights. Okay?
Right.
That is what we want to see done. And businesses have to have, frameworks internally built, like human rights policies at the workplace. So that relationship is harmonized when they're engaging with their employers, they're engaging with their employees, they're engaging with the environment, they're engaging with things to do with climate change. All those capabilities need to be invested in. And we cannot leave out those who are directly impacted by operations of business enterprises. Right. I talked about children. Children need to be left out of, being employed before they're, the right age. Women don't need to be abused in the processes of business operations. You need to look, how do you take care of persons with disabilities? How do we find a space for dialogue between culture and the law, or culture, what we call, issues to do with morality versus the law versus business and human rights. So we need to have that dialogue. Yeah. And we cannot leave a voice out. And the youth is the future, and we need to be focusing on the upcoming generation. Yeah. I hope it provides a bit of some clarity around that when it comes to investment in business and human rights.
It does. I wanted to. You spoke about how we need to kind of domesticate some of these principles into our national laws, and I'm going to kind of make this a bit more case specific, because this issue of domestication has come up, right? And we are currently in the thick of, I don't know what to call it, an incident where the Kafue River Basin was recently polluted by acid that was brought into the water, but I think there was a broken tailings dam or something that caused about 50 million liters of acid and effluent to get into the basin. And this is one of many cases, because pollution in mining towns is a normal thing, unfortunately. And as we've been doing work around this, we've engaged with lawyers and we've engaged with people, and there's one thing that's coming out very strongly, where they're saying, yes, quite all right, there's still a lot more that can be done. And I'll speak in the Zambian context. There's still a lot that needs to be done in terms of domesticating certain principles. But we already actually do have a decent amount of legislation that exists, local legislation that exists that is intended to protect, for example, the Environmental Management Act and all these other acts, even all the way up to the Constitution, which guarantees certain rights. But then despite this, we've consulted so many lawyers on this, and all the lawyers are saying the same thing. The laws are there, the provisions are reasonably sufficient, but there's this big problem with implementation. And before we talk about the Kafue River issue, I just thought, I should ask and get a bit more clarity on that, because it's like, if we do domesticate these laws, what guarantee or what seems to be causing this problem in your view, where you domesticate the law and you have this? One of the senior lawyers in a webinar I attended this week said it so nicely. She says, our laws, we have these nice laws that are sitting on shelves gathering dust. So if we domesticate all these provisions and all these principles, what's the point, if they're also going to just be shelved to gather dust, and there's this big implementation problem? What do you think is causing this? And how do you think we can address it?
It's something, again, that we need to understand very deeply, because there is these general statements which are usually made that we have laws in place, we have mechanisms in place to deal with some of these issues, but we still don't know, or we haven't done proper research to understand to what extent are these laws being complied with,
right?
Or to what extent are we committing to laws that speak directly to business and human rights? And currently, Zambia is conducting consultations on the National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights. So hopefully, we should have a much better understanding on how the current pieces of legislation, policies or programs or institutional mechanisms align with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, or with the international law. Now, I would try to get myself away from being a generalist when it comes to, or being an absolutist in terms of making a statement that we have laws, we have this. I understand it's a question of compliance, right?
Right.
To the existing mechanism. But I'll take you. I'll take you back. I do not want to sound pedantic. No. We need to retrain the existing stakeholders, whether lawyers, whether economists, whether political scientists, whether cultural institutions.
Right.
We need to retrain them, or give them much more advanced capabilities in business and human rights to appreciate what exactly it is and what exactly it is not. Again, I told you that we lack institutions that are very direct when it comes to skilling in this specific area.
Right.
And you can forgive people for making such general statements about, issues of commitment and compliance to human rights instruments. Can we have the judiciary have the capabilities to deal with issues of business and human rights? Can we have legislators with capabilities to legislate effectively when it comes to business and human rights? Can we have lawyers able to defend the space of business and human rights? Can we have non-governmental organizations develop capabilities and have instruments where they can effectively work on business and human rights? Can we have the cultural institution, the houses of chiefs, with enough capabilities in business and human rights? Can we have the rights holders aware aware of business and human rights? When we reach that level, then we will come back on the same table to talk about commitment and compliance. I can tell you that in Africa we have our domestic policies and legal orders speaking to business and human rights, but in fragments. And businesses thrive, where there are loopholes in such spaces. Right. Okay. Right.
Yes.
Now we are saying, can we narrow that gap by making our laws strong, making our policies strong, making our institutions responsive, making the judiciary, legal scholars, political scholars, business leaders speak to business and human rights in a coherent manner. If we do not have that, then we will still come back to talk about being generalist in our statement, that we have laws, we have policies, but it is not true that those laws and policies are aligned to the international law per se, or aligned to the emerging international norms on business and human rights, the rights to development, So we need to have the same language being spoken first before we talk openly about commitment, because you cannot commit to something that has gaps,
Yeah.
I don't know if it speaks to your question.
It does.
But we need to develop. We need to develop those capabilities.
And you've kind of even actually answered what my next question was going to be, but I'll ask it anyways, maybe just in case you want to kind of maybe make any more additions. I was going to ask you what your thoughts are on this recent Kafue River acid spill, because I know you have studied a few of such incidents that have happened around the continent. So what are your thoughts on this incident? What lessons can we learn from this? How can we sustainably prevent some of these incidents? And that's what I'm saying. You've answered some of those questions already, but maybe if there's anything else you wanted to add to share your thoughts on regarding this current issue that we are facing as a country.
Yeah, I haven't comprehensively, reviewed the Kafue River case. I first read about it on the website of the African Union, and when I came on the ground, I'm yet to get to understand the actual impact on the communities. But look, our argument has always been that businesses can no longer do businesses as usual, as long as your impact has a negative implication on the environment, on people, on climate change, on human rights. You have to remediate.
Mm-hmm.
You have to put in place mechanisms to prevent them from recurring or from happening again.
Yes.
But it tells you that there is a lapse in operation that led to that leakage happening, right?
Yes.
And when it happens, somebody needs to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is not by coincidence that it is happening. We need to go deep to understand why did it happen in the first case.
Yeah.
And what impact and the scale of impact is it having on the environment and on human rights. And business and human rights is saying when such happens, then there has to be an accountability for that. Now, who is supposed to account? I told you the primary responsibility of government is to ensure that they protect human rights, or they protect people from third-party human rights violations. And third-party meaning that they protect people from being harmed by operations or business enterprise. That is the primary duty. So government has to account for that duty to protect, whether there were lapses, responsibility. And in this case, the Kafue case, they had a duty to ensure that there is no leakage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that leakage has a negative implication on the environment. It has a negative implication on human beings. It has a negative implication on, where human beings derive their livelihoods from, and even animals, So they have a duty, meaning that they cannot be absolved from the incident. They have to account for their actions. They have to be held to account.
Yeah.
And there is no in-between discussions about that. So where such an incident happens, we need to have a much more comprehensive investigation by independent bodies to understand the scope of the impact of that leakage, and that negative impact should be met with effective remediation or effective remedy. Okay, it's like a cause and effect relationship.
Yes.
Where is the problem? What caused that problem, and what is the effect of that problem, and what should be done? To make sure that it does not reoccur, and also those who have been affected are given effective remedies. Effective meaning that whatever harm has been caused needs to be addressed, right? And needs to be addressed in the same way in terms of the scope of the impact on people and the environment. Simply clean the environment, clean the water sources that have been polluted. Making sure that you restore it to a state where it was before, or to a better state than it was before. And if people are involved and they are harmed, you make sure that you give them access to remedy. So there has to be accountability for that. And this is where I am saying that we need to have the capacities of lawyers. We need to have the capacity of advocates, those who are advocating, for business and human rights. We need to have the capacities of government. We need to have the capacities of businesses strengthened in a way that they all speak together when it comes to, the Kafue River case. But there has to be accountability, and the accountability has to be public. So nothing falls within the cracks. That is what it is with business and human rights.
Interesting you say that, because it's like you keep answering my questions before I ask them. When we talk about the need for advocacy in the communities and the need for advocacy in civil society, my next question was going to be, where do we place ourselves? I say we as civil society and also general communities, like people actually living in these affected communities, people who can't drink water anymore, people that have to now travel long distances, which is, and how practical is that even to begin with, to kind of get food, because the food in their area is contaminated. What role can we play in the business and human rights ecosystem? Yes, there's And I think maybe let's touch this more on the community side, because our chat has kind of spoken to a lot of things that we as civil society with a bit more capacity and knowledge can do. But then if you look at, let's speak about this in the context of the communities, people living in these affected communities, the women, the children that you've been speaking of, the people living with disabilities, the minors themselves, who on average have very limited access to information. And yes, as a civil society, we can now get into the communities and begin to advocate against some of these things and advocate for some of these things. But then, in terms of creating those strategies, what do you think would be the most effective role for communities to play in this ecosystem? A role that you think, and by effective, I mean, how best do you think they can compel businesses to be more compliant? How best do you think they can engage with government? And how best do you think we as civil society can leverage our relationship? Because civil society has a generally good relationship with the community, usually. So how can we leverage our relationship to also kind of strengthen this business and human rights ecosystem?
There is no silver bullet. I would say we let's look at the multi-pronged approach. Okay. Firstly, rights holders need to be made aware of their rights broadly. Okay. Because, when someone or when groups or communities are aware about their rights, they tend to claim them.
Yes.
Okay. And they tend to defend their spaces when it comes to human rights largely. Meaning that we as a first thing, we need to empower them in human rights. That's the bare minimum that we need to be focusing on. And secondly, we need to invest in creating networks where communities find it reliable to channel their grievances whenever they're grieved, or advocate for their rights whenever they come at crossroads with human rights. So it all comes to the element of empowerment, because if you're not empowered onto something, it is going to be very difficult for you to defend. Secondly, provide them with the necessary information. The necessary information in a language or in ways that they best understand. Meaning that you go to the very basics, that if me and Mayor Mandy can easily tell a child what his or her rights are, and a child is able to understand, then there you have it in terms of impact. You need to make sure that the information is available and in a way that it is understood by the rights holders in the communities there. That mother of you and me who does not understand or have difficulties in understanding what business and human rights is, we have to make sure that we get means to communicate that to them. And that is what we call, you are talking about access to information. We need to make sure it's available to them. Once this is done, they should be in position to defend. And rights begin from the community level. It's not a top-down thing. Right. It is a bottom-up thing. Okay. Yes. Programming is where we talk about top-down, bottom-up approach. Now, that's for the rights holders. Empower them, provide them with the necessary information. And who should do this? Civil society and government. Government, of course, takes the primary role, unfortunately. or fortunately, sorry, because you gave them your mandate to put them up there, and they are not absolved from that mandate. That is what they are supposed to do. You don't really need to be begging them to do that. You need to be telling them to do that. Civil society complements where there are gaps in terms of service delivery by government or other stakeholders. Now, civil society need to invest in networking in the area of business and human rights. You will find you are much more effective in terms of addressing some of these issues like the Kafuye case. If, for example, you have developed capacity in business and human rights, and you say, lads, look here, can we launch a joint investigation on this matter so that we have a better information to engage with businesses or engage with the institution who is alleged to have committed this harm, and also, engage with government when it comes to advocacy. So when you have a network that is strong, it is easy to hold other stakeholders accountable, because I can tell you that governments are very powerful, and so too are business enterprises. So how do you sit on the table where you have two power centers, and for you do not have the power? You may not talk, or you may not even be given a space in that table. So when you invest a lot in network building and capacity building for membership of the network, that will give you leverage as civil society organization when it comes to approaching business and human rights, including the Kafuye case.
Yes.
And secondly, for business, for civil society, you need to broaden your network and beyond Zambia, to look out to other jurisdictions for purposes of learning what is being done in my country, Uganda, what is being done in Kenya, who are already having national action plans on business and human rights, what is being done differently in Nigeria, what is being done differently in Liberia, who are already having, national action plans on business and human rights, what is being done in South Africa that have very evolved space for protecting economic, social, and cultural rights domestically. What about in other jurisdictions with dissimilar characteristics, like France has a law on business and human rights, Germany the same, Netherlands, UK, Australia, and the US. They have very strong legislative and policy frameworks on business and human rights. So this network you're building beyond will help you a lot. And in any other case, most businesses that are at the center of human rights abuses in Africa, and I'll tell this me for free, have origins outside Zambia, or have origins or have their home countries outside Zambia. You'll find they are based in Europe. They're coming from Asia.
Yeah.
They're coming from the Middle East. So how do you deal with businesses that have transboundary or operate across frontiers rather than just one jurisdiction? It is not so easy if you do not have networks that are beyond just one jurisdiction. And this is where we need now as civil society in Zambia to start investing in our capabilities. There is no one way around it, but I can tell you, you have to invest and invest and invest in capabilities for business and human rights if you want to make headway in a positive way. I hope that answers your question.
It does. That was very helpful. And I was thinking to myself that it's a great thing that Zambia is actually currently in the process of conducting consultations with communities and civil society, businesses, to kind of develop our own national action plan on business and human rights. And I think it's a timely move because it will lay a foundation for several other initiatives amongst businesses and civil society. So, it really just kind of puts everything that we've kind of discussed into motion, in my view. And yeah, so that was super helpful. Unfortunately, we are about to wind up our very insightful chat. And before we close off, I want to kind of maybe ask a bit more of a personal question, maybe to get your, again, to tap into your experience or your get some advice from you for listeners who are interested in starting their own organizations or interested in pursuing a career in business and human rights, which is a new path. And, sometimes, like you mentioned, this is a very new concept that is not really as recognized as others. So, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of, I don't know whether to call it anxiety that comes with doing something that not everyone is doing, and kind of being one of the first, like a pioneer of a space almost. What advice do you have based off your experience and your journey so far? What advice do you have for young Africans that are seeking to pursue a similar path as yours?
Well, business and human rights, it's a discipline for the future. Okay. We are just at the very beginning of, trying to build capabilities in this area globally. I can tell you that by the time I went for my research in 2017, I did study the national action plans on business and human rights in 3 countries, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. None of the African states had in place such a mechanism, but they were trying to commit to, such measures domestically.
Yeah.
I was scared. I was really scared. I didn't know anything, what to do, because when I got the scholarship, I went to university. I had a very lucrative job, being paid very well with the United Nations. So I was torn between the scholarship and going into the academia. Work and the scholarship, because I was not lacking anything at all. So I asked my supervisor then in office. He was called, he's called Professor Uchenna Emelonye. He's a professor in the University of Bournemouth. And he gave me a very simple analogy that, if you want to further your career, it's a personal goal, okay?
Yeah.
You further that career, because you never know in future that specific skill might be needed one day when you least expect it. But the way the world is moving now, there's quite a lot of things that are happening. Funding cuts, organizations are being closed left and right. Yeah. Governments are downsizing.
Yes.
Businesses are shifting in the ways of, the way they're doing things. Artificial intelligence has come out. Yes. Where redundancies are being created left and right. But what will never be taken away from you is the skill you develop as a person.
Right.
That one will remain with you. So if you take the route of scholarship through research, that skill will help you achieve both your personal dream and also, other dreams that you will be having in future. So I had to painfully resign from the United Nations and go for this, which I never regret actually, because investing in your capabilities has a ripple effect in that it doubles your net. I mean, the returns on such investments. Or it increases. Sometimes it increases 4, 5, or even 10 folds. So I would implore you, the business and human rights is interdisciplinary, and there are several angles you can approach it. Right now, we have artificial intelligence, business and human rights concept that is coming up in Europe. You could look at it from a policy perspective. You can look at it from a legal perspective. You can look at it from a developmental perspective. There are several angles of looking. We have things to do with clean energy, business and human rights. We have in the School of Planning, how does business and human rights, how do you plan for business and human rights across jurisdiction? I have friends who have done maritime, they have done their doctorates in maritime planning of the sea,
Yes.
where they have pushed the School of Planning into planning in the sea, planning for the sea, or space planning. How about you look at business and human rights from the perspective of the sea? It's a very virgin area that it's becoming. I mean, people are still to look into. You're looking at business and human rights from the perspective of the extractives, from the medical field, from I mean,
Yeah.
it's the world is there, the future is there for you to grab, and I would implore you. I came out as one of the first generations of doctors in the field of business and human rights, and specifically, if you look at my career, I'm an expert in business and human rights, but I'm specifically looking at a polycentric approach to business and human rights. If you are to look at that scale in Africa here, I might be alone, but not that nobody in future will come to look at the same. So come and join business and human rights, because we need scholarship in this area. I asked my university, that is Ulster University in the UK, I said, can I develop a module and start to, teach students in this area? And they told me, we need 10 of you. We need 10 PhDs to start a program in the areas, but you're only one person. So basically, we don't have that capacity to do that. And what does that tell you? That we need young people, as well as old people, to come and join in this area. And the net returns, you will appreciate it. So fear not the unknown. In any case, that is where scholarship is. Because if you're going to research something that has already been done, I can tell you, we will never fund such kind of concepts. We want to know what is not known.
Yes.
And that is why I'm saying, please come on board. Tell us. Do not say that the idea is very abstract or the idea is so out of reach. No, that is how competitive the world is.
Yeah.
Colleagues, yeah.
Dr. Howard, this has been an amazing and insightful chat. I think the last thing that you said that has stuck with me is that the future is there for us to grab it. I love that. So true, and I've learned so much from our talk just here, both the technical stuff and also from your personal experiences, that I think I can also even apply to my own journey. So thank you for sharing, and I know that our listeners have also benefited greatly from your expertise and your insight. So yeah, we're going to end here. But thank you once again for joining us, and we hope to have you back on another platform of ours soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.